So, it seems that you have been studying English for quite a while, haven't you? Well, say something cool in English. Why don't you? I'm all ears. I bet that made you feel some type of way, didn't it? Because I know that has happened with me a countless amount of times. I've heard this phrase from my parents, I've heard this phrase from my friends, and I know exactly what happens after somebody asks me that. Say something in English. Panic. Nothing but panic. Your tongue goes boneless, your lips refuse to listen to you, and your brain is on fire, just desperately trying to come up with something. And in the end, everything that you can muster up is nothing but hello, my name is, and that's it. Well, congratulations. You have just encountered language anxiety. And I'm very proud to be the first person in our series of podcasts about language anxiety to use this term. It is something that, in my opinion, every single every single English learner, every single person who studies English is familiar with. There comes a time where you encounter this phrase, this exact situation that I've just described to you, where somebody asks you, "Oh, you study English? Wonderful. Why don't you tell me something? Tell me, like, recite a poem in English, or say something cool in English, like an interesting quote," and you just can't come up with anything. The only thing that you are able to experience is fear, nervousness. You start worrying about everything that's going on in your head. Why? I'm supposed to be a good English speaker. Why can I not come up with anything? And that is language anxiety. More specifically, uh, language anxiety is not a diagnosis. It's not an official diagnosis because anxiety disorders exist. Language anxiety is just a type of anxiety, right? And it encompasses feelings such as worry, fear, nervousness, and other heavily debilitating emotions. I'm sure we're all familiar with that, right? And for me, as a future teacher who's supposed to be an example for my students, whose English is technically supposed to be the best one in the classroom, that's a feeling that I'm very, very, very well acquainted with. I cannot, I cannot imagine standing in front of a large crowd. Well, for me, 30 people or even just 15 people is a large crowd. Standing in front of this large crowd and talking in English for an hour and a half straight. That is unfathomable. And I know how you feel. I know exactly how you feel. Like I said, every single person who studies the English language has encountered this feeling. Now, it is classified in a couple of different ways. Anxiety by itself is divided, for the most part, into three categories. Those being trait anxiety. In this case, anxiety is perceived as a person's quality, their trait, once again. Like, I am anxious. That's it. That's how I am. That's the way that I am, right? So for them, anxiety is something almost natural, debilitating, of course, and harmful, but very natural. Yeah, it persists in their daily life. It happens as often as it can happen. And yeah, that's exactly what happens. Then state anxiety exists. This type of anxiety occurs as a response to an event that happened, right? Let's say your father bursts into your room and asks, "What do you think is wrong with your room, huh? Do you think the dishes are washed and such, right?" And that makes you feel anxiety again. And then situation specific anxiety. In this case, a person, this type of anxiety is experienced in situations where anxiety is not often provoked. it's considered unusual or out of the place, right? Like something like fear of cockroaches. I don't know. Cockroaches are not harmful, but you see one and you start, oh my god, oh goodness, this thing is horrifying, absolutely horrifying, right? So anxiety in unusual situations. Now let's be more specific. Let's talk about language anxiety. Because technically these three categories can be attributed to language anxiety, but it has been categorized and classified more specifically by a couple of very, very smart people. For example, Elaine K. Horwitz and Michael B. Horwitz, along with Joanne Cope in 1986 published a paper, a scientific paper in a journal by the name of Foreign Language Classroom Anxiety. There you go. And they classified language anxiety based on effect. Now, language anxiety can be either, in their opinion, destructive or constructive. Destructive anxiety is as bad as it sounds, of course. It harms your ability to communicate with people, and it doesn't even have to concern verbal interactions. What about writing? Let's say, I'm sure, once again, you've experienced this before. You write a sentence, you look at it a few times, and you feel like something's wrong. And you've been sitting in front of this stupid sentence for like 5 minutes and you still don't know what's going on. And at this point, you're stressed out, you're anxious, and you're better off just dropping whatever you were writing in the first place. That can happen. That's very destructive. Constructive, on the other hand, is a type of language anxiety that can actually help you. Now, this doesn't happen as often, of course, as other it doesn't happen as often as destructive language anxiety, of course. uh, in tense situations, people tend to think more creatively, or at the very least they feel urged to come up with something in the heat of the moment, and that to a degree encourages them to rack their brain and come up with new ideas on the spot, which of course increases their productivity. Now, this is not something that a lot of people can relate to, definitely not me. For me, anxiety is always heavily, heavily harmful and destructive factor, right? Now, these three very, very smart people also classified anxiety based on source. So, what is the source of the anxiety, right? Now, it can come from communication, a fear of communication. Social anxiety, also birds of a feather with language anxiety in this case. Not everybody is as effective with communicating people as celebrities, for example. And even celebrities can have social anxiety. And these people interact with their fans every single day, online or in the middle of the street. And language anxiety is heavily relevant in such situations as well, because you're utilizing your speech. Aside from that, fear of criticism, another source of anxiety. Fear of criticism, and more specifically, criticism from teachers. Our podcast's main focus, teachers. Every single student knows how terrible it feels to come up to a teacher and tell them, well, I wasn't able to finish this. Or handing them a paper that is clearly not gonna get a good grade. That makes you feel some type of way. That makes you feel, once again, anxious, right? And if we're talking about language anxiety, this of course relates to English teachers. And English, you haven't even raised your hand. You didn't even raise your hand, and your English teacher asks you and tells you, I don't know, what are you going to do this summer? An immediate reaction occurs in your brain. Oh my God, what am I going to do this summer? I've never thought about this. I don't know how to put all my thoughts into my second language that I've been learning, which in this case is English. I don't know what to do. And then, bam, that's it. You're stuck. And you're stuck. And in such cases, treating these debilitating reactions with respect and with care is of utmost importance for teachers. For teachers, because the worst thing that you can possibly do is punish a student for trying. He tried. He genuinely did. He just felt extremely anxious, right? And aside from that, third category of language anxiety based on source, that is fear of tests. Tests, not sure if I'm allowed to use this word, but they suck. They do. Every single student knows how terrible they are. And in this case, language anxiety is very prevalent. You have to do a lot of writing if you're in English, if you're studying English. Of course, very relevant to language anxiety. And like I've mentioned, language anxiety is not only prevalent in communication, but also prevalent not only in verbal communication, but nonverbal communication as well. Writing a letter or an essay, anything. Especially when you when you can't use the internet to help yourself. That is terrible. So yeah, these are the main classifications of language anxiety. And I have personally, well, encountered every single one of them. I must admit that at the moment I am feeling rather anxious. I've never made this type of video. I'm unexperienced in creating content or filming footage where I'm the main character and the focus is on the way that I speak, on how I function as a communicator. And not only a communicator, a very special type of communicator, a person who speaks in not their native tongue, not in their native language. I'm using English. And as much as I pride myself on the level of my English, I know for a fact that I'm not as good as I think. I'm not. I used to think that back in 5th, 6th grade. Eventually, there came a realization in my brain. I quickly realized that even though I was the best one, I was the best English speaker in my classroom, I say that humbly, even though I was as good as I could have possibly been, I wasn't good enough. I didn't know everything. And still, there's a lot of room for improvement. I've already stuttered a lot. I'm most likely going off on a tangent at the moment, and that is what you're witnessing right now are my body's defensive mechanisms trying to prevent me from from silence, right? Because the more silent I am, the more anxious I get. But at the same time, when I start speaking, my brain can sometimes fail to keep up with my speech and struggle to come up with new words and cool sentence structures. It's not fun. It's not fun, and that's exactly what language anxiety feels like. It's serious. It is serious, and as teachers, we must understand how to deal with it for our sake and for the sake of our students who are struggling with the same issue. You cannot just ignore a student who is genuinely gifted, talented, and hardworking, but simply struggling with these uh, bothersome thoughts in their head. It's a process, and it's a process that we will clearly detail in our podcasts soon to come. Well, it's been a great pleasure, and I believe this is the end of our first episode. We've discussed what language anxiety is, we've discussed examples of language anxiety, we have classified language anxiety in several different ways, and I've shared some of my personal experience with you. Now, it is about time to start properly studying this bothersome, this incredibly annoying phenomenon that happens in our brains way too much. And I believe that this series is going to be extremely productive and informative for all of us teachers. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching.